Welcome to Innovators Inside, the podcast for people working in corporate innovation, brought to you by Alchemist X, the corporate services division of Alchemist Accelerator. Here, you'll follow host Rachel Chalmers, head of Alchemist X, as she talks to the industry's highest achievers and most compelling thought leaders. These are fly-on-the-wall conversations with leading practitioners in the field. They'll share their lessons learned so that you don't have to go through the painful experiences that they did. So sit back, relax, and get ready to level up.
Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Lewis Stewart to the show. Lewis is currently the head of strategic initiatives for NVIDIA's developer ecosystem. NVIDIA, of course, being the maker of legendary GPUs and the enabler of our current golden age of video games. Prior to NVIDIA, Lewis was the city of Sacramento's first chief innovation officer, charged with promoting and driving long-term economic growth and job creation through innovation. Before that, he spent 7 years as California's Deputy Director of Innovation and Entrepreneurship in the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. He grew up in France and Italy, played professional basketball in Peru and Belgium, and has a degree from Santa Clara University. Mr. Stewart, thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, it's an honor. Thanks for having me, Rachel. This is going to be a blast.
I would love to start with Sacramento. What does it mean to be the Chief Innovation Officer for an entire city?
That's an excellent question. And it actually took a while to figure out, because all the Chief Innovation Officers that I was looking at prior to me in other cities were doing things very differently. Some were out there measuring metrics just for City Hall, some for specific business units. Some had charge of the IT infrastructure, so it was very IT focused. For me, coming from the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, it meant trying to bring innovation that would lead to economic development and job growth in Sacramento. So, when you look at that for a whole entire city and it's a state capital, and it's really only known as a government town, that meant creating a whole new narrative around why Sacramento was an innovation hub and why Sacramento mattered to innovation globally. And so that was a heavy lift.
And it's in a really interesting position, literally. These days it's directly between Silicon Valley and Lake Tahoe, where all of the wealthy engineers moved.
Right.
and yet it has been considered a little bit of a backwater for most of the history of Silicon Valley. So how do you address that? Now it's within commuting distance, really, thanks to the Capital Corridor.
Yeah, no, I think the biggest thing that we did was change the narrative and become what we call the living laboratory. Any business that wanted to try something, that wanted to demonstrate their wares and see if something would work, we invited them to come to Sacramento and see if it's self-driving cars, how they'd operate on our streets. If it was an IoT solution, we'd work with our public works team to get things set up. We did some work around AI and crosswalks. We did a lot of stuff just to try. And a lot of that was because, being the state capital, we had all the legislators literally a mile away from us, and we had regulatory bodies, within a 5-mile radius from City Hall. So at any point in time, we gave access to businesses, to the legislature, and to regulators that they necessarily didn't have. For us, it was one phone call, and we could call folks and get people to show up, get people to conversations. And industry really appreciated that, especially startups. And that's what Sacramento was desperately needing, was a shot in the arm to support its own startup ecosystem by getting other dollars, other investment, and other startups coming to look at Sacramento as a place to do business.
And then Stanford and Berkeley are such huge engines for Silicon Valley. Did you get to work with the tertiary institutions like UC Davis?
So absolutely. I think one of the biggest things that we tried to do was set up the triple helix out of some research at Stanford. Government, industry, academia. We have government all day. Academia, we have the home of the California Community College systems in Sacramento. And then we had UC Davis, 20 minutes away if there's no traffic. And so, you bring the strength of those institutions for what they currently offer, and you bring them into new conversations that we're having around cybersecurity, that we're having around life science, that we're having around some of these other technology areas. And all of a sudden, you're talking peer-to-peer with Berkeley, with a Stanford, with an MIT, with a whatever, because because now we're actually in the innovation conversation. And it really was a global conversation because people were coming to Sacramento to visit the capital and wanted to come talk to us about the innovation that we were doing. So, bringing those universities alongside, bringing the community colleges, which made it really easy for us to at least discuss adopting new curriculum for some of these new technologies. It's a fantastic partnership.
And a little bit of home state pride there. For listeners who aren't in California, our community colleges are really phenomenal, that they're academically extremely rigorous. And of course, UC Davis is one of the world centers of veterinary and biological science. It's a powerhouse.
Absolutely.
How is that work different from what you're doing now at NVIDIA? And are there any ways in which the two roles are similar?
The most obvious way that it's different is things in industry move a whole lot faster than government. So when something needs to get done, it just gets done on the industry side. A couple approvals and then you're kind of on your way. So the speed at which business happens is crazy. So my first 2 weeks at NVIDIA, it felt like I was literally drinking from 3 fire hoses, just trying to understand, fully what the company did, because I knew that I got the video game side and I knew that it was in the self-driving car side. But then you start, looking under the hood and you have healthcare, you have cybersecurity, you have all this other stuff, which was cool because those are the languages I was speaking in Sacramento and trying to bring light to a lot of that work that we were doing in Sacramento. And the cybersecurity piece was a carryover from the governor's office, where I actually was one of the founding members of the statewide cybersecurity competition that we have in California for high school students. And so now all of a sudden there's some familiar words being used at NVIDIA, but the biggest thing is my charge is to develop ecosystems. And that's what I've been doing for the past 13 years with the state and with the city. And in this case, it's still working with academics, still working with industry. The piece that I haven't tapped into just yet is really the government side, and trying to make sure that legislation is friendly to the future that we see at NVIDIA, but then other companies are actually doing on the tech side. And all of it with an undertone of some kind of social equity. In Sacramento, it was trying to make sure that underrepresented communities were aware of the innovations that were coming. It's a little bit of the same here, but at NVIDIA, it's really about creating economic mobility in the ecosystems that I'm building. So primarily focused on historically Black colleges and universities, Hispanic serving institutions, and other minority serving institutions. But really my remit is more global in nature. So dealing with Latin America, dealing with Africa, dealing with the EU, and just looking for pockets of developers out there or wannabe developers that are looking for the latest and greatest tech and trying to bring them into our system. So everything's not necessarily about hiring everybody, but really creating economic mobility and business development opportunities by getting people tech prepared.
That sounds really fun.
It's a lot.
Also really challenging. The position a lot of us in corporate innovation find ourselves is trying to arbitrate between those two different rates of development, the very fast world of technology and the much slower moving worlds of large corporations or governments. Mm-hmm. How are you finding that balance? I know you're still finding your feet at NVIDIA, but how do you perform that impedance matching between the two rates of change?
Yeah, so it's interesting because, again, kind of leveraging what I did at the state and at the city, it's a delicate dance, right? So the work that I'm trying to do with the government is really going to be secondary by first building the relationships with the universities, with professional organizations and collegiate organizations, so that when we finally get ready to go talk to the legislature, especially here in California, we have examples of work that we're actually actively doing. So if we're working with Hispanic serving institutions in California, we want to make sure that we team up with the legislature to let them know what we're doing. And so that's going to be the same thing with historically Black colleges and universities out east and down south. And, really trying to build the story of NVIDIA beyond, the hardware video game people. Because I think going back to Sacramento, we had to build a story.
Yep.
NVIDIA has a story. Most people just know the video game side of the story.
Yeah.
Now we're trying to do the talent development side of the story, especially now with the speed of the digital information age and displacement because of the pandemic. Workforce development and talent development is going to be key to getting people back online and getting people access. And so we want to be part of that conversation.
That touches on something really deep. I was actually telling a team of my corporate entrepreneurs in my current program this morning that their technical skills are great and important and necessary. And the engineering is, without the engineering, there's no industry. But everything else is storytelling. It's learning the customer's story. It's distilling that into a story of your own and using that story to communicate and persuade and recruit folks to your cause. So that really resonates with me, the idea of storytelling as being a core function here.
Yeah, so it's crazy because I started my career in sales. If you couldn't tell a story to sell the customer, you weren't making the sale, right? It just wasn't a thing. And, all of a sudden you move into the private sector and you listen to the salesmen there and you listen to the stories they're telling to get their customers. And when I first started in the private sector, it was all, I was doing sysadmin work. So really it was a storytelling between the engineers and the CEO. If they couldn't communicate, it didn't work. Coming into government, there was never a good story being told. It was always something horrible is happening. and there was some problem. Even when I worked at the DMV, it was, okay, so what's the story to get people to understand that there really are good workers at the DMV that are trying to do their best. There's certain things that are impeding them. And then, fast forward to Sacramento, like you said, it's the city between the Bay Area and Tahoe. That's what everybody knows. And so,
yeah, Ikeda's fantastic burgers on the way to Burning Man. Yeah.
The food scene before the pandemic was fantastic.
Yeah.
It's struggling a little bit right now, as it is everywhere. But if you do have a chance to come to Sacramento, even if you're just stopping through the Tahoe, grab some food from some of the folks here. And again, that goes back to storytelling. If people don't know that there's still business happening, it doesn't really work.
When you look back on your career in innovation, what are you proudest of?
With the governor's office and the work that we did with the business and economic development department, the obvious thing that I can point to is the success we had competing for federal dollars. The state successfully was granted $600 million in partnership with universities and industry. Again, an obvious one would be the success we had recruiting the Samsung R&D headquarters to San Jose back in 2012. But really and truly, the thing I'm most proud of is the relationships that were built in the network that started to thrive at the governor's office. So through the Ihub program, made great connections with universities, in order to build a relationship so that we were successful at the federal level. With industry, we got people understanding that, it wasn't the worst thing to do business in California. And so, we saw some good stuff happening. Right. And then fast forward to the city of Sacramento, as the chief innovation officer, I'm most proud of the fact that we were able to do some real big things. We got self-driving cars to Sacramento. Everybody said that couldn't be done. Right before I left, I established a mentoring program. So that's just coming online for underrepresented entrepreneurs in Sacramento. We also launched a program called Economic Gardening to help small businesses in Sacramento. And that all came through the innovation department. And so the fact that, 6 companies in the first cohort were entering into this economic gardening program just at the beginning of the pandemic was fantastic because it helped them figure out real time what they needed to do to adapt and survive, right? And that wasn't something that a lot of cities were doing. And then, we also made it so that we had a pot of money that we were able to give them additional grant dollars to help them actually roll out what they came up with through the economic gardening program. So those are the kind of things that I'm extremely proud of. The big stuff is nice, but those little things are probably the things that I'll look back on and have the most reverence for.
Yeah, I particularly admire your work with underrepresented founders. Again, for listeners who aren't in California, this is a boomtown economy, 5th largest economy in the world. And it's also, it was Mexican before it was American, and it has Oakland, one of the great black cities in the world. And yet the spoils of our economy are disproportionately skewed towards represented founders, I guess you could say. So working with underrepresented founders, giving them the access and the resources that their competitors have is incredibly important to get some equity and some more diversity and more egalitarianism in our industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and the foundational part was the mentorship, right? And so, there's a lot of networks for founders out there. They're super exclusive.
It's really easy to overlook. And obviously, you can tell by my accent, I don't come from here. I moved here in my 20s as someone who had, really good education education in Australia, arrived and built my network and had the advantage of being white and the disadvantage of being a woman. But you come to realize that folks who go through Stanford, just graduate with their network intact. They already know VCs, they already know associates at all of the firms, they already know lawyers, they already know other founders and people who run accelerators. But even at Stanford, a Black woman will have far less access than a white man.
100%. 100%.
That skew damages our industry at every level. It's not that white men are bad at things. It's that Black women are equally good, and we lose all of that potential. We just drop it on the floor. Sorry.
No, it's fantastic. I mean, because it's 100% true. I've been on this kick for the last year talking to VCs and angel folks up here in Sacramento and a few other people, and really trying to get them to understand that, when you're even looking at making investments, look at the founding team and talk about how diverse the founding team is, because the more diverse the company is, the better returns you're actually going to have.
It's so true. The two investments I'm proudest of are the most diverse investments I've ever made. There are people doing really great work. There's Arlen Hamilton, obviously, and Frida Kapor, but there's not enough of it. And so we do have to reproduce these networks of mentorship, of nurturing, of providing access to those resources.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think while I received some pushback setting up that mentor network here in Sacramento, because it's an online platform, the pushback was from folks that had established mentor networks, right? Oh, well, how are you going to compete against mine? It's not a competition. It's like you're actually invited to come in. But this is actually lowering the barrier to entry for underrepresented entrepreneurs to gain access to mentorship so that they can actually succeed or have a better chance. And so the more the merrier. So it was interesting listening to some of the pushback I got. I even got pushback a little bit from people that said that they could create a mentor network online. And I'm like, look, this platform, Micro Mentor, it's a global platform. It's not starting from scratch. There's 1,000 people already on here in Sacramento. In California, there's already 5,000 people that are active. That's not just represented. But then if entrepreneurs are really looking at a global market, they can talk to mentors around the world. So it really is lowering the barrier for access, and you can do it from your phone. So it's a really different conversation.
One of the interesting things I find in my work in corporate innovation, working with intrapreneurs, employees in very large organizations, is that in some ways they are more equitable environments because they have HR policies, because they have diversity and retention policies that they actually enact. You run into a lot more diversity sometimes within large corporations than you do in little startups. It's one of the things that I really enjoy. There
is that diversity. There's been a diversity push ever since George Floyd, a new diversity push, right? So now corporates are trying to officially do the right thing. And you just want to make sure that, in an effort to push for a more diverse workforce that represents what the world actually looks like outside the corporation, it doesn't just stop all of a sudden because everybody thinks the work is done. It has to kind of keep moving.
I do want to call out Coca-Cola for praise here, just parenthetically. Based in Atlanta, they've been walking the walk for years, and you can have your issues about them selling sugar water. I know I do. The truth is that company has been an engine for particularly Black women executives to rise up through the ranks, and it's been extraordinary as a powerhouse of economic growth there.
Yeah, no, Coca-Cola, I'm familiar with them from the days I was doing supplier diversity stuff. They were the most proactive looking at small minority-owned businesses to do business with. Everybody was trying to get on the bandwagon there as well. Pepsi does some great stuff. I admire them just for what they've done to help establish the entrepreneur ecosystem in Atlanta with Georgia Tech and some of the other universities out there. So,
if you had one do-over, you get a mulligan, you get to redo something that you did in your career, what would you do differently?
In my career, I'd have probably gone to play basketball at 21 as opposed to going when I was 27. Just so I'd have a longer career and more opportunity to play. I made the decision at 21 to leave college early and just go work. I did not pursue basketball for another 4 or 5 years. I literally stopped playing. So I think that's probably the biggest thing I would do over.
I know almost nothing about sport, but as I understand it, starting at 27 is pretty impressive anyway, isn't it?
I just happened to be back in shape, which is fantastic. But, if I'd have left at 21 when I was at arguably my prime, right, it could have been a different life situation, being overseas for 6-7 years.
But then you wouldn't be here on my glamorous podcast. So it all worked out.
Which is why I usually don't look at do-overs, because everything has led to this moment for a reason.
Yeah, you would have been a different person.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I tell people that if I had an extra inch and a half, I'd be a different person as well.
So in corporate innovation specifically, is there anything you'd like to get a do-over for?
In corporate innovation, a lot of that was done on the government side. And I think the biggest do-overs would be to actually be more of a consensus builder. A lot of the work that I just did,
right?
Because I couldn't wait for the speed of government. I think there have been more longer lasting changes had I actually gone to get buy-in, done stuff a little bit more government when it came to innovation. I think that'd be one of the things I would change.
It takes a particular temperament, though. It takes phenomenal patience to do that.
It does.
This is one of the reasons I keep talking about them, but I really love the work that 18F has done, the digital branch of the General Services Administration. They had that startup spirit of do-ocracy and just getting stuff done, but they still managed to have this tremendous impact in DC.
Absolutely.
By really taking customer discovery seriously and listening to the agencies that they were working for and delivering what was actually needed and not the newest, shiniest thing.
Yeah, and so 18F is fantastic, and there's a lot of orgs out there that are doing some amazing work. The challenge that I faced, both at the governor's office and Sacramento, was the governor's office. It was me and an army of interns doing the work of innovation. In Sacramento, it was me and 2 staff. So, we didn't have an army of people to create the time to do the true buy-in. And a lot of the buy-in that I'm talking about is actually internal.
Yeah.
External, people were really happy with what we were doing. Internally, rubbed some people the wrong way, but probably needed to do a little bit more on the relationship building side, because I know that's how 18F does a lot of their work, is a lot of relationship building.
Yeah, a lot of diplomacy. I'm not sure I could
Absolutely.
do it. So that's a great lead into the next question. What do you think makes it so hard to obtain consensus to get that buy-in?
Look, on the government side, it's really easy to point at what it is. You have a whole bunch of differing views, and you have folks that have skin in the game, whether it be the politician, it has to be their idea, or some of the higher-ups in the organization that it doesn't necessarily fit with what their vision of how things should happen. So I got lucky in that there was a slight bubble around me. I had a good relationship with the mayor. I had a good relationship with the governor before that. So, I was able to kind of move through the space and just do. But at the same time, there was some rubbing the wrong way. And that's the hard part, because if you rub the wrong person the wrong way, things get halted super fast.
Yeah.
And a lot of times you actually don't see it coming, which is even harder. Everything's going right, and then all of a sudden it just stops, and you're like, what happened? And it's not till months later that you figure out, oh, got it. And so that on the government side, and on the private sector side, right now with NVIDIA, the thing that makes it difficult now is we're moving so fast. It's hard to build relationships to bring people along. And so I'm trying to pull the emergency brake a little bit, especially in my role, so that I build the right relationships and have the right impact on the future that we're trying to be part of.
Developer relations is so fun and so challenging, because you're, again, drinking from a fire hose. There's all of this development, all of this innovation, and you've got to somehow communicate it to the people who need to use it in their work. And it's a huge challenge. Yeah.
It's an amazingly big challenge, but it's fun work. And you find that organization that shows promise, and you're like, oh, okay, let's stick with this real quick. You end up making some long-lasting relationships that way, when you can show that everything is aligned and you actually have the same interest in making the same impact as that organization. I always tell people the hardest part is looking at your customers in a 360-degree manner. Once you can figure out what your customer needs are, then you try to meet them. But if you haven't even identified who your customers are and what their needs are and how to talk to them, it's not a thing.
You come into this STEM world full of engineers, and you're trying to teach them empathy every day.
Yeah. So it's fun.
How might you distill all of this experience into 2 or 3 lessons for our listeners?
Yeah, I think the first thing is what I just said, is look at everything as a customer. If you are going into this world in service and everything is a customer service experience, one, there's a whole lot of learning that you will be able to do. There's a whole lot of good that you'll be able to do if you're looking at your coworkers as customers, if you're looking at your bosses as a customer, if you're looking at your customer as a customer, right? What are their needs? Because everybody has different needs in order to be successful. The second thing that I would say is trust your gut. And if a door opens, give it a shot. Go ahead and take a look inside the door and see if there's something in there that you can learn from. The biggest thing for me was just these few transitions from state government to city government to private sector. There was a gut feeling that something needed to change, right? It just so happened that a door would open, and super lucky that way. And then the last thing, just be humble, and be open to listening. I think that's been just instilled in me from growing up, to sit back and listen. Everybody has a story. And then it also helps you learn how to translate. If you're really trying to get to that collaboration place, you can translate what one customer is trying to say to another, but they're missing it. Come in and be that intermediary and the translator. That served me well over the years.
That last one is so important. The world is so complicated now that it can't fit into any one human brain. So we have to parallel process. We have to work side by side to break the problem down into manageable chunks. Listening is really the only way to get there.
Yeah, listening is key to any of it. If I can add one more, the last thing I would add as a fourth would be start from yes. Don't immediately say no. You turn down too many good opportunities by saying no. I tried to get my city team to always start from yes. At the state, always try to start from yes and figure out how you actually do it until you absolutely have to say no. and you'll be rich from just experience of trying to get it done.
It's painful though. I mean, it's hard to make yourself do that, to take those opportunities, because it's making yourself vulnerable and opening yourself to failure. And sure, you look back at the other end and say, I learned so much from that failure. But while you're going through it, it's really hard to remember.
No. So Rachel, you're 100% right. And imagine being in government where failure is really not an option. In government, they're allergic to failure. And so you're walking into a space, I'm walking into a space where I'm thinking that the world is my oyster because of the access that I've been privileged to have. I have access to the governor, I have access to the mayor, I have access to all these legislators. Okay, so let's figure out how we actually get it done. But at the same time, externally, developed a good relationship with the media, but I had to admit the failures because the media will hold you accountable.
If they're doing their job.
Well, if they're doing their job, they will hold you accountable to what you haven't done. In Sacramento in particular, we got to the point where if something didn't happen, I was getting phone calls. I got to be good friends with folks at the Bee, folks at the Business Journal, folks at the News and Review and the radio. And they would just call me and say, so what happened? And you talk them through what happened, you tell them what's coming next. And they respect that a whole lot more than you bob and weave and and do a whole lot of stuff. You got to be okay with the failures, but you have to keep people looking at actually what's coming and what the future actually looks like. So
yeah, and again, for my entrepreneurs, this is a huge challenge. You're rewarded in the corporate environment for producing things that are perfect. So they always fall into the trap of the perfect is the enemy of the good. They're always trying to optimize too early and produce something in its finished form. And it's classic waterfall thinking. It's exactly what you need to survive in a large organization, and it's inimical to innovation.
Yeah, absolutely. You got to be okay with failure. You got to get comfortable wearing it.
We've touched on this a couple of times, but how do you think the pandemic might affect the industry in the longer term?
I'll hit it from two sides. On the government side, look, the pandemic is devastating. At the local level, local cities rely on sales tax revenue. And so if nobody's coming to your city, tourism, nobody's spending money, nobody's doing anything, trying to figure out the continuity of operations is tough. On the corporate side, kind of depends on what you're doing. And, with digital transformation, a lot of tech companies probably doing okay because everything's moving to digital. So if you're producing products that are being consumed right now, it's fantastic, right? This is also a good time for the social good companies. I'm actually in my line of work now trying to partner with a few folks that are out there trying to do societal impact stuff like CodePath, and trying to see how we can impact dropout rates and talent development challenges that are out there for minority students. This is also a time where the gap can grow if you're not partnering with organizations like that. You don't want that to happen because it's even more devastating than it has been in the past.
The disparity opportunities are being exaggerated by the challenges of distance learning. It's one thing if you have your own room and your own laptop set up, but if you're working from a borrowed laptop from the kitchen table, you're just not offered the same opportunities.
There's been a couple of students that have called just trying to connect with me. The only place that they had quiet was their car. And, they're apologizing for this and that. I'm like, hey, we got connected. You still had the wherewithal to get it done. And that's the most important piece.
Yeah, the unbelievable moxie of these kids.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm super impressed. And at the same time, I worry as a parent. You see a lot of mental health issues right now. And that's going to be kind of a long-term thing, government, corporate, whoever, that we have to deal with as a society.
Yeah, we just have no idea what the long-term effects are going to be, particularly on these young people who are at this crucial formative time.
Exactly.
Great lead into my next question. How do you personally avoid burnout?
So if you ask my fiance, I don't deal with that well, because I just push through a bunch of stuff, and then all of a sudden, my body's exhausted and I just fall out. Right?
Yeah, this is the secret behind man flu. It's actually cumulative stress from the last 18 months when you didn't take any downtime at all.
Yeah. I mean, that's literally what it is. But the reason why I did that was twofold. One, I thought that if I took time off to take care of myself, something would fall through, because I had a small team and there were so many moving parts and whatever. So that was my time in government. The private sector is a little bit different. It's just super exciting right now. And, they've given me permission to actually take time off, because they understand that, especially new, coming into an environment that's moving so fast, you need some time to actually get your brain right. In all the roles that I've had, it's always been about the learning that kind of kept me going, and you avoid the burnout. I think both at the governor's office and at the city, I was probably reaching burnout, just because, you're running into walls all the time. And after 13 years of running into walls, you're kind of like, I need to do something different. And luckily I got plucked out. Super grateful for the opportunity with NVIDIA, and now full steam ahead again.
What is the best way for our listeners to connect with you or to follow your work?
Yeah, so it's a fantastic question. Most active on LinkedIn and on Twitter. I'll probably get back to posting more on both platforms, taking a couple months to slow down a little bit so that I can learn what my new job is. But, I also have a blog, meetmrstewart.com, where I post articles and essays, and I have a couple other ones coming out about diversity right now. So LinkedIn, Twitter, and my blog are the three best ways.
The blog is absolutely great, listeners. You should check it out.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that.
What does the future look like for you personally?
Look, for me, getting literally, like I said, plucked out of government by NVIDIA has helped me reshape my thinking and kind of refocus. I'm able now, let's put it this way, I'll give you a quick story. My fiance, because we're all working from home now, comes into the room. She hears me laughing. She hears how light I am on conversations. And for her, she's noticed that there's been a weight lifted kind of off of my everyday grind that I had working at the city, and prior to that working at the state. So I'm in a place now where I've had all this learning from working in government. I want to be able to bring that experience to the private sector and continue to do good. I have the opportunity now in the strategic initiatives role, essentially, when you get down to it, affect economic mobility for underrepresented communities. I couldn't be doing something more exciting in this particular time. So personally, looking forward to one of these days getting married. The wedding got canceled twice because of COVID.
When you have that honeymoon, it's going to be epic.
It's going to be fantastic, right? So, a couple of years, my kids will be out of high school, so we'll be empty nesters. The future's bright, so it's going to be exciting.
I'm going to grant you a wish now, imaginary but still fun. The most positive, beneficial, delightful future of our industry in 5 to 10 years. What does it look like?
Wow. Okay. So in 5 to 10 years, I truly hope that industry is reflective of what the world actually looks like around. I mean, at the core. And it's not a matter of bringing a more diverse workforce in, but it really is about closing the gap and creating opportunities for more folks. I think that 5 to 10 years, we're able to talk to each other again and not be so polarized. That absolutely needs to get fixed so that people can actually hear each other. I've seen families get torn apart over these past 4 years. So for industry to be able to start closing the gap and make people more relatable, make people able to connect, better and have less stress, it'd be phenomenal. My world personally has slowed down, which is great. Yeah, I wish that for more people, that they can see stuff coming a little bit slower and then that they're in positions to actually handle the hard times a little bit better.
I really like that vision of the future. Is there anything else I should have asked you that we didn't cover already?
No, I mean, I talked about my kids briefly. I talked about the fact that my wedding got canceled twice. Talked about I wish I could have, I would have gone to play basketball at 21 instead of 27. I've truly enjoyed this time. I hope to stay connected. We're going to be doing some really good things at NVIDIA and some of the partnerships that we're creating. So I look forward to everybody reaching out. If you have the will or the desire to partner, I'm always trying to find a way to yes.
Louis, it's been an absolute delight. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Rachel, it's been a pleasure, and I truly appreciate the invite.
This has been Alchemist X Innovators Inside. You can find the transcript of this conversation, plus links to whatever books, articles, TV shows, and apps we talked about on our blog. And stay connected by following us on Instagram and Twitter. If you found the podcast valuable, feel free to share or tell your colleagues. We love hearing from you. Send us your comments, feedback, suggestions for future guests, or just say hi by emailing us at axii@alchemistaccelerator.com.